Haidete o Filoi. I'm Fletcher from amindforlanguage.com, and you're listening to Greeking Out, a podcast for ancient and Koine Greek learners full of tools, tips, and possibly tirades on learning Greek using comprehension-based methods. If that isn't familiar to you, check out episode 0, The Manifesto, for more info. So I just got back from a trip where I got to spend about 18 hours in a conversational Koine Greek class. I feel like my Greek reading skills, at least in Koine, in Septuagint New Testament, are actually pretty good. But it's very different actually being in class and using the language to communicate with people and answer questions and respond. And I feel like the main takeaway that I got from this class was I learned some new vocab and clarified some things about prepositions, which was really great. But the main growth was in fluency, both fluency and speaking primarily, right? That's kind of what the focus was. But I felt like it had benefits in my reading speed as well. So today I want to talk about fluency development and what role fluency development plays in language learning. So, you know how to learn vocabulary and grammar, and that's generally what's studied in a lot of ancient language courses to the exclusion of other things. And from a comprehensible input perspective, we know we kind of pick these things up along as we go, although we should also incorporate some explicit language study where we're focusing on maybe using flashcards or a similar technique for vocabulary and occasionally reviewing grammar rules as needed. I think that's helpful primarily if it's done just in time. Like as we're reading something, we say, hey, this is confusing. Then we kind of go look it up. And, then we're meeting a felt need, which I think is a more useful approach generally to learning grammar. But as far as fluency development, fluency isn't just about knowing a lot of words or grammar rules, right? It's about being able to use what we already know quickly and without a lot of effort. For example, imagine we're trying to have a conversation with someone, which, with Koine Greek is possible. There's groups online you can join to do that, or in classes, or, with friends if you have people you're studying with. So, ideally in that situation, you want to be able to respond quickly without having to think too hard about the words or structures you're using. And so that's kind of fluency, is that ability to use what we know well and quickly without too much effort. So how do we get there? Well, Paul Nation in his book, what do you need to know a foreign language? He suggests that there's 4 pieces to activities that help us build fluency. So first is we're using familiar and relatively easy material. So, stuff we already know, or that is well within our grasp of vocabulary and grammar and things like that. So we're not trying to learn new stuff here. We're just focusing on using what we already know. So you might think of it like, practicing scales on a piano. We're not learning a new piece of music. We already know the scale. We're just getting it into muscle memory, as it were. Second, there should be time pressure. So we want to go, try to go faster. So the use of a timer, or, if you're working with a partner, somebody who's waiting for you can provide that pressure. Third, these activities should involve a large quantity of practice. So just like any skill, fluency is developed through repetition. And finally, they should still be focused on communicating or understanding. We're not just trying to memorize so we can parrot things. We actually want to use the language. And again, that's one of the keys to comprehensible input-based learning. It's one of Stephen Krashen's ideas. And I think others too, probably. Like we want to be communicating as much as possible and have that involved in our learning process. So either someone is communicating to us through what we're reading, or we're attempting to communicate, or at least practice communicating by speaking. So how can we do this? From a listening side, Nation recommends repeated listening. So we take a piece, recording of a text we already know, and listen to it repeatedly and try to increase the speed gradually. And we want to try to get to the point where we know it. It's just familiar. We can comprehend it. It's easy. So there's a challenge there, especially with ancient Greek. How do we find materials? Well, one simple solution is just read the thing yourself and record it. Don't worry if you have making mistakes in the reading or stumble. That's fine, right? But just read it through, slowly if you have to. Because again, you can use your listening app to increase the playback speed. That's not a problem. Another option is there are a number of texts that have already been recorded. Depending on your tolerance for different dialects, different pronunciation schemes. There's the Alpha with Angela series, which granted is not a text; it's a teaching material. But you could listen to those videos with increasing the playback speed. There's different browser add-ins that let you do that. I'm thinking also of, I believe it's the Greek War of Independence, which is not an ancient text, but is a text recounting the Greek fight for independence from, I believe, Turkey. And that's been recorded with some kind of an Attic style or Erasmian pronunciation. You could download that. It's quite lengthy and listen to it. I think there's a variety of other options out there as well. You can find some Lingua Graeca, Percy Illustrata recordings on YouTube, recordings of Seamus MacDonald's reader, and just, practice listening with that. For developing speaking fluency, Nation suggests a 4-3-2 activity. And we did this actually at least once in the class I was in. So you try to say something, communicate something in 4 minutes, and then you try to do it again in 3 minutes, and then you try to do it again in 2 minutes. And at least with my experience, when we did this activity, by the time I was doing it for the second or third time, I was getting through it much more quickly. The words felt more comfortable and automatic. And I wasn't simply repeating something. I hadn't actually memorized this thing, but just going through the same material helped build fluency in communicating it. Another thing we did was building reading fluency, and this was a big payoff. In class, we call it a 30-30-30 activity. I'm not sure if Nation refers to it that way, but the idea is take something we're familiar with, a piece of text, read it for 30 seconds, stop, go back to the point we started at, read it for 30 seconds again, and see if we can get farther, trying to read faster, stop, go back to where we started, and read for 30 seconds again. See if we can get even farther. That took a minute and a half. Then, wherever you got on the last time, stop there, start, repeat the process. Do this a few times as you work through the text. And I feel like that really helped. Even with words I'm not familiar with or didn't read then, I feel like it's just helped my comfort with the Greek alphabet, which, granted, I've been doing Greek for years, and sometimes longer words are harder to read. I think it's also helping me focus on reading word shapes rather than individual letters, which I think is a mark of a fluent reader, if I have a correct understanding of the research there. So I think that's a very useful activity. Nation also has a few, I think for writing, he suggests a 10-minute writing activity, which I believe just means write for 10 minutes, set a timer, write for a full 10 minutes on a topic. For a lot of us, especially with ancient Greek, that could be difficult. So we might be writing a bunch of very simple sentences, but still worth doing, worth the practice. Again, building fluency. And I think you could take that 4-3-2 speaking activity and do something similar. Where you write for 4 minutes and then stop, and then write for 3 minutes, trying to communicate the same things, and then write for 2 minutes, trying to communicate the same things, and see if you can. Now, I know one of the issues there is, mechanically writing. My handwriting is quite poor, and so, writing simply takes time. But I think that pressure might help us put more time into the actual mechanics of writing and less time into the thinking of the grammar. So I think that's still possibly doable as well. In any case, these are just a few things that Paul Nation recommends, a few techniques. And I found them quite helpful. the ones that we used in class, and I'm hoping to do a few others too. One thing Nation also recommends for working with content is in different modes. So listen to something or read something, then listen to it, and then try writing about it. And so I think that's another useful way that you could do as almost a pre-activity for some of these fluency development things. So read a text or listen to a text. Read a text, then listen to it. And again, you could record yourself reading it if you don't have listening material available for that text. So read, listen, and then try writing about what you've read. I think that's great because then you have some model sentences you can use, or you can get your vocabulary if you need it, or grammar forms because you just read a text. You can refer back to it while you're writing, and then from there you could jump into either the 10-minute writing thing or a 4-3-2 style of activity, either speaking it or writing it out yourself. Just writing it multiple times I think would be useful. So there's a few things based on Paul Nation's book, which I'll put a link to that in the podcast description. And just remember, fluency development, it's an ongoing process. It isn't something that happens overnight. And so using some of these exercises in your language learning practice could be helpful. And again, remember with Nation's framework, we're talking there's 4 strands, right? We want to have input, output, explicit grammar, language study, not grammar study, but explicit language study, which can include grammar, vocabulary, things like that, where we're really looking at the details of the language. And then, finally, fluency development, i.e. working with those other things we've done in the other 3 strands of language learning to build fluency and comfort and speed and efficiency in using what we've encountered, what we've studied. And so here was an episode on fluency development. I hope you found it helpful. These tips hopefully will be practical and useful for you in building fluency and comfort in what you've studied already. And as always, keep practicing, and we'll see you back next time. Intro and outro music is Funky Thanksgiving by Admiral Bob, used with gratitude under Creative Commons 3.0 Attribution License. The track can be found at dig.ccmixer.org.